Senator Birmingham.
Thank you, Mr Acting Deputy President. Mr Acting Deputy President, I rise to also contribute to this debate on the Renewable Energy Electricity Amendment, Excessive Noise from Wind Farms Bill 2012. Mr Acting Deputy President, can I welcome the opportunity provided by this debate for us to make some comments on what is a genuine area of concern in parts of the community, for us to ensure that those concerns are appropriately reflected in this place, and for us to make clear the inadequacy to date of government responses to those concerns. All businesses require not just a legal permit to operate, but a social permit to operate. And what has occurred over recent years in the wind sector is that aspects of that social permit have come under threat. That social licence to operate as such have come under threat. And they've come under threat because of genuine concerns that many people have about the impact wind farms are having in their communities, on their lifestyles and on their health. Now, those concerns should not be easily dismissed. Those concerns should be seriously dealt with. That is not to say that we should be shutting down the wind industry. That is not to say that we should not recognise the very important role that wind power has played in helping Australia to grow its renewable energy sector, because there is an important role being played there by the wind power sector within the renewable energy industry. And we want to see continued growth of renewable energies. That is an important part of Australia's energy mix for the future, important especially for how we deal with issues of tackling climate change and reducing our greenhouse gas emissions. But that does not mean that we just ignore or sweep under the carpet community concerns that exist. Senator Madigan, in his remarks, and well thought out remarks, much of them were too, drew some very good comparisons and quoted from some of the Green senators in this place in those comparisons. Comparisons in terms of the debates we have had in here, and there have been plenty, around coal seam gas, or more recent debates around the so-called super trawler. In all of those areas, there were emphatic arguments to let science speak, to ensure that we have the best available science undertaken, that we rely on that research, and that we act on what that research says. That, Mr Acting Deputy President, is what the Coalition believes should be the case here as well. We think that it is important to make sure that beyond any doubt, the community, the wind industry, the regulators at a state level in particular who provide the planning approvals for these developments, all have sound evidence on which to base their decisions. Indeed, submitters to the inquiry into this legislation made similar views known. Mrs Maria Linke wrote in her submission, "I feel there needs to be independent health studies into rural wind farms focusing on excessive noise. However, until that happens, I fully support the Renewable Energy Electricity Amendment, Excessive Noise from Wind Farms Bill 2012. Let's reflect on what Mrs Linke is saying there. She supports this bill because of the absence of other action. And it is the absence of other action that I condemn this government for. There should have been, by now, underway very thorough and comprehensive reviews into the health effects of wind farms. Why should there have been such reviews? Because no less than a previous Senate inquiry had asked for them, had made it clear that this was the best way forward to deal with the community concerns that exist. On 23 June 2011, the Senate Community Affairs References Committee reported into the social and economic impact of rural wind farms. Among several recommendations made by this committee, and I emphasise by the whole committee, including the Labor senators on that committee, the government senators, on 23 June 2011, one of those recommendations was that the committee recommends that the Commonwealth Government initiate, as a matter of priority, thorough, adequately resourced, epidemiological and laboratory studies of the possible effects of wind farms on human health. This research must engage across industry and community and include an advisory process representing the range of interests and concerns. Mr. Acting Deputy President, it is very clear from this recommendation what the committee sought. Very, very clear. But far from treating the Senate Committee's recommendation as a matter of priority, the Gillard Labor government took more than 14 months to respond to that inquiry, just to respond to it. It even took more than 7 months after this Senate called on the government to act immediately on the Senate's committee recommendations. The government finally responded on 13 September 2012 to the committee's report of 23 June 2011. The government should surely appreciate that such delays and tardiness in responding only add to the angst and concerns that do exist in parts of the community about the operation and impact of wind farms. The government response, when it did come, was manifestly inadequate. The government claimed to accept the recommendations in principle. However, what we got instead, effectively, is an NHMRC literature review. Now, I have complete faith that the NHMRC review will be thorough. I'm sure they will do a good job of it. But it is not what the Senate had recommended, and it is unlikely that this review, in fact it is clear from the evidence already received, that the nature of this review will not satisfy the concerns of those in the community. It will not provide the Australian-based type of research with thorough epidemiological and laboratory studies that is necessary to provide the robust scientific evidence needed to manage this issue well into the future. So just as senators frequently come into this place and call for us to act on the science, on this we should also act on the science. But we should acknowledge that the existence of wind farms in Australia is not something that has been in existence for a century, is not something on which there is a deep reservoir of well-established epidemiological and laboratory research. However, the industry has been about now long enough to ensure that that research is undertaken, and we should commit to making sure that that research is undertaken. And it is to the shame of the government that they didn't grasp and seize that opportunity more than a year ago to get that research underway and to provide the people who have come to see me, the people who I've gone to see, the people certainly who obviously Senators Madigan and Xenophon have heard from, the people some of whom have made submissions to this inquiry, like Mrs Linky, who I cited before, who have concerns and have a right to expect that those concerns will actually be listened to and acted upon. Now, there is some good research happening in places, Mr Acting Deputy President. There is some progress in terms of what is occurring. I note as recently as yesterday a news story from my own home state about an Adelaide University team that is trying to investigate precisely how turbines produce noise, especially in the low frequency range. Now, universities don't start undertaking research in these areas if they don't think there's something to look into. So Adelaide University, and in particular Associate Professor Con Doolan, who commented on this, obviously thinks there is something that needs to be looked at. He said, and I quote, "We have a fair amount of knowledge around the noise generation mechanisms, but, particularly in the low frequency ranges, we don't know a lot about how they combine together. This project is aimed at getting to the bottom of what is creating the noise that can cause disturbance." The Adelaide University team will build a small wind turbine in the university's wind tunnel in Adelaide and use advanced techniques to measure aerodynamics and acoustic factors. Professor Doolan went on and said, "If we can understand what's creating these sounds, then we can advise governments about wind farm regulation and policy and make recommendations about the design of wind farms or the turbine blades to industry." That is exceptionally welcome work from the University of Adelaide, Professor Doolan and his team. And we welcome that type of progress because it will only be by providing the robust and sound scientific evidence that we will ensure the social licence to operate for the wind farm industry remains strong and well supported within the communities in which they operate. The Coalition believes that after all of the waiting from the government for them to act on last year's Senate inquiry, it is now time for the Parliament to try to force the government's hand. So it will be our intention during the committee stages of this debate, which I acknowledge are unlikely to be had today, to move amendments to cause to have undertaken the type of NH&MRC study that we have spoken of and that was recommended by the Community Affairs Committee last year. A study, a piece of research, a body of research that includes full spectrum acoustic monitoring, epidemiological and laboratory studies. Research that ensures the views of industry and the community are heard during its process so that it can seek to address and study those areas of concern. That it looks at audible noise, low frequency noise, infrasound, electromagnetic radiation and vibration arising from or associated with wind farms, including wind turbines, transmission lines, substations, telecommunication towers and any other structures associated with industrial wind electricity generation. Importantly, that it's undertaken ideally in a way that has buy-in from both sides of this debate, from the Clean Energy Council and from the Warborough Foundation, so that there is, at the outset, some acceptance of who's undertaking the research, how it will be undertaken, what it will be covered, and some confidence that the outcomes we get can be used in a sound way to inform future regulation of this sector. Now, Mr Acting Deputy President, I said before in relation to the need for science and to act on science that we hear this pointed out in relation to CSG, to coal seam gas. And of course, we have seen by the Labor government actions taken to have thorough research undertaken into the impacts of the coal seam gas industry. We've seen the government set up an independent panel to oversee that research and to provide some certainty around its impacts, especially the impacts on groundwater systems. So there is no reason why the government could not embrace the type of action, should not embrace the type of action the Coalition is proposing in relation to wind farms. Can I say as well that there is another area of this debate in which I think it is analogous to the position on coal seam gas, and that is that the Commonwealth, with its research funds, with its expertise and expert bodies like the National Health and Medical Research Council, should take a lead role in helping to establish the evidence base. However, we should also acknowledge the Constitution under which we operate, the federation that we have, and respect the fact that state and territory governments are ultimately responsible for the type of planning decisions that relate to projects, be they coal seam gas projects on the one hand or wind farm projects on the other. That's why, Mr Acting Deputy President, that whilst we have an understanding of the concerns that Senators Madigan and Xenophon are pursuing in this legislation, we equally think that the type of legislative reforms they are proposing are not the types of things that this Parliament should be legislating for, because they do intrude on the rights of the states to regulate for their communities as they see appropriate. We think that if you could get the ideal outcome, if you could get the comprehensive evidence base that informed what would be sensible exclusion zones, what would be sensible noise limits, what types of regulation is necessary for the wind farm industry, if you could get that evidence base that had the confidence of both sides of the debate in this argument, then the pressure can be applied to those states, the expectation applied to the states to ensure that they enact the type of planning laws that operate on the best available scientific evidence. And we want it done in a way that provides some confidence and certainty for the future, for the wind farm industry, just as much as it does for the communities in which that industry operates. The wind farm industry has come a long way. Senator Cameron cited some of the statistics in his contribution about the global size of the wind farm sector as well as the number of wind farms operating in Australia, many of which of course are in my home state of South Australia. Wind farm and wind power generation is critical to achieving the 20% renewable energy target set by the Commonwealth. Now, I've expressed in this place some concerns previously that we have not banded or set aside some of that target to ensure that other technologies, the emerging technologies, can definitely benefit from it. And I think that is a genuine concern that we need to keep in mind for the future. But nonetheless, the wind farm industry deserves just as much as the communities in which these concerns have emanated from to have certainty for the future. Certainty for both sectors. Certainty that everyone has confidence in the evidence base on which decisions are made, that everyone has confidence on the evidence base on which regulations are put in place, that everyone has confidence that no harm is occurring, or that if harm is occurring, it is being prevented by the actions taken of industry and government working together. So, Mr Acting Deputy President, as I said, noting that we probably won't get to the committee stage today and that this is the last sitting day for the year, I invite the government over the next couple of months before the Parliament returns to think long and hard about the type of inquiry this Senate called for more than a year ago and the type of inquiry that we have urged be undertaken, and that if necessary the Coalition will move through the Parliament be undertaken to provide the type of sensible, sound evidence base for the future that the communities deserve where wind farms are based and the wind farm industry itself deserves as well.